Hello and welcome to the Prayer, Patience and Pandemic Seminar. My name is Mahsheed Keskin. I am the Executive Director of the Australian Intercultural Society, or the AIS as we refer to it. For those of you who are joining us for the first time and who are not aware of the AIS is a not-for-profit organisation established in a pre-9/11 world with a view of strengthening mutual respect and understanding between people of diverse communities through meaningful engagement. And tonight's program is an example of this. And it is my pleasure to partner with Trinity College to bring you today's program with the great support of University of Divinity and the Islamic Sciences and Research Academy. May I take this opportunity to acknowledge the traditional custodians upon the land which we're all gathering on and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Before we move on to the program, I just wanted to give you a quick update of some other exciting webinars that we have lined up. On the 6th of August, we'll be looking at homelessness and addressing the topic of There's No Place Like Home, a conversation about homelessness, particularly during this COVID period, and look at some of the efforts made in getting people off the streets and assisting them in trying to find permanent solutions to their housing. On the 12th of August, in partnership with Victoria University, we'll be doing a youth panel called Shut Up and Listen, Multicultural Youth Voices in 2020, where we'll be bringing a diverse range of young, powerful, energetic speakers who'd like to share their views about today and the future that lies before them. On the 10th of September, which is World Suicide Prevention Day, we'll be looking at youth suicide prevention, and we're looking to partner with the Australian Institute of Family Studies. More information will be coming soon. And on the 15th of September, we are one of the supporters of the Equal Employment Opportunity Network's Summit 2020, where we're looking at diversity and inclusion in the workplace. All those details and more will be available on our website. It's www.intercultural.org.au. So for tonight's program, just a reminder, you are able to engage in this conversation by asking questions you may have on the chat section of YouTube. So feel free to ask questions as you see fit. And with regards to tonight, the aim is to provide perspectives from each other's faith tradition on the importance of prayer and patience, how as individuals and communities we face challenges and build resiliency to overcome them. The pandemic is challenging everyone's resiliency as it allows us to step back and ponder on the value and purpose of life. And I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panelists. And to get things underway, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Our moderator is the course director at the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization at Sturt University. She is also a senior lecturer in Islamic spirituality and contemporary Islamic studies. She's also the co-founder of ISRA Australia and managing editor of the Australian Journal of Islamic Studies Journal, double-blinded peer review academic journal. She's been involved in community outreach for over 20 years, has extensive experience in teaching education, particularly Islam, to audiences from high school students to youths to adults, both within and the non-Muslim community. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Zuleyha Keskin to conduct the session. Zuleyha.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you for that introduction, and it's lovely to be here with you all this evening. I'm really excited about our two speakers who will shed some amazing insight into this very important topic of pandemic prayer and patience. I also just want to mention, thank Trinity College, University of Melbourne, University of Divinity, AIS and ISRA for putting this event together. It really is very timely. So, I think we will have some very good discussions tonight. I will shortly introduce our two presenters or speakers or conversation participants. But I want to put it out there from now that we would really like you to put forward your questions as well on the topic, which I will be sharing with and asking to our presenters as we go along. So who do we have today? We have firstly the Reverend Dr. Colleen O'Reilly, who is an Anglican priest and the chaplain to Trinity College in the Universities of Melbourne and of Divinity. Previously, she was the Vicar of St. George's, Melbourne and St. Faith's, Berwick. Her doctoral studies was in the area of rights and pastoral care. Colleen is the mother of 2 sons and grandmother to 3 boys who live in London. She is married to Father Walter McEntee, formerly chaplain to Melbourne Girls Grammar School. Our second presenter or conversation participant is Dr. Mahsheed Ansari, who is a lecturer in Islamic and Contemporary Islamic Studies and the Higher Degree Research Coordinator at the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization, Sturt University. Her research interests include the history of Islamic thought, spirituality, and culture. She's also a historian interested in the formation and development of minority communities in Australia. She is currently working on the Muslim Heritage Research Project at the Public and Contextual Theology Research Centre at Sturt University. Thank you and welcome to you both, Colleen and Mahsheed. It's lovely to have you here.
Hello.
I guess we'll start the conversation, and before we, go into spiritual or theological questions, I wanted to ask you, how have you been coping with the pandemic yourselves? Now, it's getting, let's admit it, worse and worse. And for those of us who are in Melbourne, we're in lockdown. Mahsheed, lucky you, you're in Sydney, but we know that in Sydney too, it's a bit nervous times. So how are you coping? And when you respond, what has been a particular challenge for you during this time? But also, what has been a benefit or, the silver lining, I guess, of the situation for you? So, Colleen, we'll start with you.
Hello, thank you, and hello everyone who's joining us. What have been the particular blessings of this time? Well, I'm fortunate that I don't live alone. I live with my husband, so I have companionship at home. And thanks to the modern technology and even with my incompetence, where I'm able to connect with friends and family on the phone and via email and computer. And that's helpful, I think, in managing the anxiety. I have a sister and my grandsons, my son and his family living away overseas. And of course, I feel anxious on their account, but at least we can talk. I can remember living in London many years ago, 50 years ago, and you had to book a phone call and it was £1 a minute. I think I had 2 phone calls in 4 years. So we live in times where connection is possible. I have purposeful tasks, thank goodness, and there are people that I'm able to support. And routines help. I find that just keeping a routine at home, regular prayer, keeping the household going, that's really good. It gives structure to the day. And doing things and recognizing that they are for the sake of others. I when we were told we have to wear masks, I thought, oh, I do not want to do this. I knew that I needed to, but I thought, I'm going to feel so silly. I don't want to go out if I have to wear a mask. And then one of my Jewish friends said, it's a mitzvah. We have to do it. It's a mitzvah. We have to do it to save lives. And I thought, yep. And then somebody, one of my Christian friends said, it's the 11th commandment, mask up. So that helped me to accept that, there are things that we can do that actually really help other people. And that's how I've been managing to get through this strange time.
That's true. The mask and just going out everywhere and seeing masks everywhere when you're seeing facial expressions and people smiling, all of a sudden everyone was behind a mask.
Yes.
It takes time getting
I'd never worn a mask of any sort ever. So it was quite an experience at first.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your experiences and also the blessings, which there are many of. Mahsheed, how about for you? What have been the challenges and what have been the blessings in disguise?
Yes, there are always blessings in the challenges out there. But I have to say, at the start of the COVID, there's a lot of anxiety in our community, as Colleen said, and I felt that too. A lot of uncertainty as to how it was going to unfold. I think it was really important as a community for us here in Sydney and other Muslim community to sort of have the correct rhetoric to encourage our community to come on board with, accepting the reality that had befallen us. And I think at first we were a little bit complacent, including myself, because, even though it was closest to our, China is one of our, Asia Pacific countries, we just thought it'll never happen to us. But I think when it really hit home, I think I did feel anxious and uncertainty. But I think as it unfolded, it was a little bit difficult for me at start. I do have a husband, but he works very long hours. I did feel a little bit lonely, and I've been reflecting on that as well. And that's something that I've been voicing a lot. That I feel myself and other Australians, I think, as well, and even faith leaders and community members, that we're going through this pandemic of loneliness as a challenge. So it put me down a little bit at the start, but then I picked up very quickly, as Colleen said. I'm working, and I'm blessed to still have a job, able to work from home, and continue the works. And also Ramadan coincided for us, of course, and that was sort of like an opportunity. And I really think, and that's where the two merged, that faith intercepting the calamity, that spiritual time, provided that needed space and psychology for me to channel myself back to coming to a balance within myself, and connecting with God and turning to Him in prayer and reaching out to others. I have family here, but I also have family abroad, and some of them not in fortunate countries as well. But very, very counting the blessings, every blessing that we have. And by the way, we're approaching a bit of a scary situation in Sydney as well, as we are getting really an outblast of hotspots. So we feel our Melbourne brothers and sisters very much.
Yeah, well, I hope that you don't get the lockdown as well, but it is what it is, I guess. But just coming back to Colleen, you know, Mahsheed mentioned how her faith helped her, and I think we see that faith has been an important part for a lot of people during this journey. But yet, I also feel that it hasn't been easy to embrace their faith or help their faith to uplift them during this time. What are your thoughts on that from all faiths?
Well, of course, an important expression of our faith is meeting with people who share our faith and coming together. And of course, churches and places of worship have been closed. And I know that's been particularly difficult for people. And they've missed that. And the clergy, I know, and others have worked really hard to give people a sense of still belonging and a sense of cohesion. And lots of church services are on Zoom or being podcast in some way. And it's been stressful when families experience a death, because so few people can gather for the funeral. And that's also a time when lots of people come together and support one another. So those have been very difficult things to get through. Personally, I've gone back in my own reflection to times in Israel's story when they've experienced catastrophe or a disaster of some kind. I find the Psalms, the book of Psalms, is a great resource, because the psalmist constantly prays about waiting and wondering, when will God act? Is God going to act? Why do bad things happen? Why does evil flourish? When are you going to act, please God? And yet constantly comes back to affirming that it's in the waiting that the psalmist finds the patience and the confidence and trust, because in the end, patience is another way of trusting God to be God, and to be ultimately holding all things together. Patience is a kind of forbearance, a capacity to enter into the longer term suffering experience, and not to be looking for sudden or instant solutions. And I'm old enough, of course, in myself and in my faith, to be able to bear with it.
Yes, patience. It's definitely a medicine that we all would want to have, instantly instilled within us at the moment.
And we know how impatient children can be.
Absolutely. I want it now. I want it now.
Yes. Are we there yet?
Are we there yet? Yeah. But you're right. There's a lot of stories or historical events for us to reflect on. And Mahsheed, I guess just before we move on to, Colleen mentioned how this collective, it's not there at the moment with with the congregation and so forth. And Eid is coming up for Muslims, which is on Friday or Saturday. What do you think the implications are going to be?
Yes, it is, as Colleen mentioned, it's very difficult for faith communities to function as we do normally, congregating in the church or the synagogue. And we are actually in the 10 holy days of this Islamic spiritual calendar, where we normally would celebrate the pilgrimage, the return of the pilgrims from the Hajj on the 10th day. And of course, that's obviously not happening. So it is a sad event on one, you know, on one hand. But on the other hand, I think it's also an opportunity, as strange as that may sound. As Colleen mentioned as well, I think many faith communities have been forced, including the Muslim community and community that I belong to with ISRA, we've been forced to think innovatively. So like transforming Friday prayers to Friday sermons, you know, live on Fridays was an opportunity. And also I think it's pushing us to think beyond ritual and find the essence in our prayer and in our rituals. So sometimes I think, you know, that formalism that religion brings about can scare people in our current contemporary culture. And I think one of the things that's been happening is with the innovations, I think we've been, as a collective humanity, been forced to think beyond the ritual and, you know, connect with the divine at a deeper level, find meaning in this sort of senseless world. It is a bit of an arid spiritual desert that we are going through as a human collective, as a global community. But I think we're looking to faith, and for my tradition as well, as I said, patience is very much encouraged. And also, I mean, goes hands in hand with faith, and really finding that faith at a time where it's difficult to do so, when you don't have community around. But yeah, at the same time, seeing the opportunity in the calamity as well.
Mm. On that point of patience, Colleen, you mentioned how, you know, how impatient children can be, but as you mentioned also, as we get older, we become more patient. So would you say that these challenges and hardships are needed for our growth? Would that be a positive outcome, if we can put it that way?
Yeah, I suspect we do need them, in a sense that it's through them that we learn and grow and make that shift inward that Mahsheed was talking about, that shift from observing the externals, and then the externals become part of who we are and part of the rhythm of our own being. And that's the point of ritual, that we learn to make it something that we do outwardly and inwardly. And in the Christian tradition, we speak of patience as one of the gifts of the Spirit. And there's a paradox in that, because the gifts are, yes, they're freely offered, but you really only understand them and actually acquire them if you put in the effort and the discipline and the work that means that they grow within. And then there comes a point often where you've been working at something and then have an insight or an experience, and that feels like pure gift. And yet you couldn't have received the gift if you hadn't done the work beforehand. So if you hadn't spent the time in prayer, and prayer, of course, is much more than just speaking to God. It's about opening up the whole of ourselves ultimately to God. It's about living a whole life in conversation with God. And there are aspects of prayer such as you know, the adoration of God, simply being in awe that God is God, and asking God on behalf of others, or reflecting on characteristics of God. These are all aspects of prayer, but it's only as you work at those that I find that eventually the gift comes, and it feels like pure gift, as if you've done nothing at all to achieve it. Which is what we talk about as the compassion and the mercy and the love of God.
Yeah, talking about prayer, Colleen, I mean, we often think about prayer in the sense we pray for something, you know, we pray for the pandemic to go away, for example, which is there, but can you pray a pandemic away? And if not, what is the purpose of prayer during a pandemic?
I don't think we can pray and say, please God, make it go away. And God will think, well, you know, enough people have prayed, so therefore I will give in to what they're asking. I don't think, and I'm not suggesting you think that either, but I think the the prayer during the pandemic is so that we will continue to trust, that we won't despair, that we will continue to have hope, that we will continue to trust that God is God and will be God. And the pandemic is an aspect of the brokenness of the world. In our tradition, we speak about the world as fallen, broken. We know the world is broken. We know that we ourselves are, in a sense, broken people. But it's the promise of God in the Christian scriptures is that God will be working within that brokenness to bring about new life and healing and recreation. And we get glimpses of that all the time within ourselves and within the world. And so the prayer upholds us in that hope. It holds us within that hope. And I think that's its value in anything that's distressing, whether it's individual or communal.
Yes, the hope is such an important part of us, of who we are. And I guess, Mahsheed, from an Islamic perspective, is there a particular state that a pandemic creates which helps with prayer?
Absolutely. And I think I really concur with what Colleen has been saying. It really resonates very much within the Islamic tradition as well. A calamity or a pandemic such as this does really, it allows us to really see ourselves. It challenges us, as we spoke earlier on, in so many ways. And I think we as Australians have been challenged financially, socially, economically, psychologically, on various levels. So it's an expression of our helplessness at the core of his ability and his strength. And I think it sort of humbles us, the prayer, as Colleen was saying, when we turn to God in supplication and connect with him. We're also acknowledging that there is a creator, that, we're not, because often, even if we have faith, we sort of take a back seat and relax and sort of forget that, that there is a creator that is connected to our world and life. I think what we are learning from prayer is that, from our traditions, is that when we open up in our brokenness, in our weakness, to the most able and most powerful one, I think this conversation itself creates, affirms our faith. Like Colleen was saying, a gift. It really is a beautiful gift, because it sort of makes us realize that, God is our ultimate creator, and ultimately things are in his hands. Everything is within the realm of his sovereignty and governance. He's the originator, and he evolves us from state to state. The one who's well acquainted with our needs. So even before I utter my needs, oh God, I feel, anxiety or loneliness, or I'm scared for my family, for the economy, etc., he is able to respond to all of our needs. And I think prayer really allows our ego to be humbled, and for us to be able to read. It's a calling out to the divine, that it's beautiful, and its purest form. It's a truthful expression of devotion to the creator. And I think if we are having these moments of gifts, as Colleen beautifully described, I think that it's a privilege in these calamitous times. There's so much to discuss on prayer from the Islamic tradition. So many verses, and I'm sure Colleen and I would love to do that all night.
Sorry, I just realized I muted myself. I wanted to take the conversation in a little, you're going to get alerted, unconventional way, in that we often talk about faith and how it helps us to get through it. But when we look at some of the great historical figures, the religious figures, I feel that we need to acknowledge that they also hurt, they also suffered. We usually look at the end of the story in there, whether it's prophets or other great historical figures. We look at the end and we might say, look what they achieved. But when they're going through it, there's a lot of challenges. I guess, is that an important part of the process, considering a lot of people today have mental health issues, they're experiencing anxiety, or is that something we should not focus on? I want to identify who first. I thought I'll give who put their hand up to answer that first.
I'll Colleen can go.
Of course, for Christians, the supreme example of a person who suffered and who was patient and trusting in that suffering is Jesus. And when I think about the way in which Jesus faced his arrest and his trial on charges that were not just, and his execution, I see someone who just, no matter what was happening, refused not to trust God, to be God. And I find that so compelling. It for me, it echoes the story in the Hebrew Scriptures, the story, which is a novel, the story of Job, a man who suffered unjustly, and he too questioned and searched and wondered, but in the end had to acknowledge that God is God. And I think that Jesus gives us the supreme example, one of course we can't live up to, but one which inspires and strengthens us if we reflect upon it, that he continued to trust even in the face of the most horrendous violence and hatred, and did not retaliate, and trusted that somehow, though I suspect in that moment he couldn't see it, that God was there and God was in it. And of course, for Christians, we believe that God vindicated Jesus through the transformation of his life in the event we call resurrection, which is God showing us the promise that the whole of creation will be renewed. And so that's, for me, is the supreme example of someone who trusted through all circumstances.
Yeah, Mahsheed, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, beautiful example that Colleen gave. Absolutely, I think as well. I was actually going to say Job as well, which is Ayub, and peace be upon all of these great figures that really, and I think in our traditions, our scriptures, with these narratives, they're so rich, and like you said, Zuleyha, they really do show the suffering that these great figures went through, so that I think as a humanity we have role models in them. Examples, we have metaphors. They're like archetypes. Like Job, as Colleen was saying, is also celebrated in Islam as being the archetype of the champion of patience, as he's known, because of his physical and situational condition. Of course, Prophet Muhammad and all the prophets and all the great saints and figures have always had these troubles, because, you know, how do you balance between the beauty of patience that we are taught with faith and also the reality and the pain and the suffering that the human experience is, you know? And there is a fine balance between the two. As Colleen said, you know, through prayer and acceptance, the calamity can be transformed to a gift. You know, in the tradition attributed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who, by the way, suffered all kinds of calamities, as we have recorded meticulously in his biography. He says, no one has ever been given a gift other than patience. You know, no one has ever been given a better gift, other than patience. So if we are given patience when calamity strikes, then that's a great gift. And we see these archetypes like Jesus, peace be upon him, Job, and Prophet Muhammad. You know, he particularly the years of sorrow when he lost his beloved wife and uncle, and he was excommunicated and boycotted for 3 years, literally starving as a community. He really shows us an example. But I'd like to reflect on a woman, if I may, which is Hajara, or Hagar from the Bible as we know her. Abraham's, Abraham, the story of Abraham and Ishmael and Hagar. And of course, because we're in the Hajj season, she comes to mind, and her struggle. You know, she was left in the desert, in the arid land with no water, with an infant, and she was just running from one mountain to the other. And I think this speaks volumes to us that yes, we are patient, but we don't just sit there and give up. You know, there's a saying of the Prophet, peace be upon him, tie your camel and trust in God. So she tied her camel, she ran to one mountain, thinking there's birds, then there might be some water, made the prayer. And here the patience and prayer is connected in her story. Then she runs to the other mountain, hilltop, and she comes back, notices that there is at the foot of her child a hope, which is the water, the Zamzam water that is beneath her child. So I think Hajar, she's also, we today, from the Islamic tradition, follow millions and billions of Muslims for 1400 years have been following in the footsteps of one woman, an African woman, Hajar, and she has a lot of strength, and I think her story says a lot. And like Colleen said, there are so many examples, and I think we cannot deny the reality of our pains and suffering, but I guess the hope is that through faith, through our faiths and our traditions, we find meaning within them and find a cure, and by turning back to the Creator.
Can I just respond to that? Because Mahsheed reminds us that patience is not resignation as in the sense of giving up. It's active and revolutionary. And I can remember through the long years when we were working very hard through our synods to have the Australian Church ordain women, I wrote a letter, an open letter to the head of our church at the time, saying that we women had revolutionary patience and that we would wait because we needed a better future. And I think that reminds us that patience is actually active. It's not there is a proper resignation, a proper surrendering of ourselves to God, but along with that is that active seeking what to do in the situation. I had a lecturer many years ago who used to say, God saves the world and the rest is up to us, because we can't do that. What we can't do, God does for us, and the rest is up to us.
So the human, there's responsibility upon the human to do something.
Indeed, yes.
You don't just sit and say, oh God, send me this or send me that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Let me get 100% in my exam and I just will take an early night. Break that way. Right.
Yeah.
That's a good highlight there, point. Now, we've got a few questions coming up. So also a reminder that anyone listening in, if you have any questions to our presenters, please don't hesitate to type your question. Now, this first question, we've talked about how churches and mosques are a place for congregation. What do you think our churches and mosques will look like after we finally are able to return to worship in person? Will things resume as in the past, or do you think there will be changes? Colleen, we'll start with you.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
People are used to being home, now.
Sorry?
People are used to being at home now. Is it going to be easy to get them back?
Well, that's one of the questions. I suspect that a lot of churches have been televising their services, and I suspect that's going to need to continue, because I think older people are going to be reluctant for a while to come back. I think they'll come back more slowly than others. And will people have got out of the habit of coming? That's another question that I know my clerical friends who've got parishes are asking. So I'm not sure. I think it'll take us a while to trust being together again, to trust that it is safe, that it's safe to share a common cup as we do in the Christian tradition, that it's safe to embrace one another. It may take some time before we recover our confidence in those things that we just took for granted until now.
Very true. Mahsheed, what do you think? What are the mosques going to look like post-COVID?
Oh, yeah. Well, we try to come back slowly in Sydney. Didn't quite really go into full fruition with the Friday prayers especially. But I think, as Colleen said, it's going to be a little bit different for us to do that. But for us, of course, the Friday prayers is highly encouraged. So, and as Sundays are for church. So, yeah, but I really encourage, and this is something that I'm also saying, because women in our community actually miss out sometimes on Friday prayers in terms of listening, and because they have children and whatnot, sometimes they can't go. So I really find that this televised broadcasting has been really useful for women in terms of their spiritual growth and development. So I really think that that's something that perhaps I encourage mosques to keep if they can, to benefit the women as well.
Yeah, I think we've seen that online, this presence has filled a gap that will continue even post-COVID, it seems, because it reaches to people who may not be able to come to the church or to the mosque for whatever reason. So yes, we can definitely see that. Okay.
Just to add to that, I've actually had the lovely experience of being able to Zoom into a synagogue of friends of mine, and I have a friend who's a Greek Orthodox priest, and I've Zoomed into his services. So it's been a very rich time in enjoying the worship of other communities.
You've been having a ball during this time.
It's been interesting.
Yeah, very insightful having those opportunities through Zoom. It's fantastic. Okay, the next question we have is, how does one who lives by themselves, you both did acknowledge you've got your husbands with you, live by themselves, keep their hope up when there's no one around them to motivate them or raise their spirits? Like really feeling that isolation.
Yeah, that's a real challenge.
Colleen, yeah?
It's a real challenge. And I think if I think back to when I lived on my own for a time, many years ago now, I think maybe just having one thing in the day makes a difference. I know once I had before me a whole day and nothing seemed to be, there's nothing I needed to do, nothing I had to do. And I remember there was just one possibility and it changed the feeling for the day for me. So I think that's where we need our friends. We need one another to find those motivations, and routine seems to be really important. If we can stick to the routine, eat well, sleep well, that helps. And reach out, just say, if I'm not above saying to somebody, I just need to talk for a little while, or I just need to be listened to for a while. Yeah.
Like you said, the technology is there now, not like it was before when you were giving the example. It's just so easy to, I mean, it feels like we're in a room at the moment. We can see each other.
Yeah. Pick up the phone, email. Yeah.
I agree. I think it's very difficult. I actually felt it, despite having, sometimes we can all have experienced loneliness at different levels in lives, families or partners. But being completely alone, because we're human beings, we have that social side. Absolutely, that's a big concern. But be alone would be alone. And again, I think here, faith, and if we can tap into having that space, creating that space in our day or night to have a communion with the divine, with God, how powerful would that be? And I know that we still rely and we need human connection. And definitely, I agree with what Colleen and Zuleyha said in terms of trying to use technology and sometimes by helping others, you alleviate your own pains. So try and reach out to your neighbours, to the elderly, to those that are less fortunate than you. The advice always is look those that are less fortunate than you. That'll help you see your worries as less. And hopefully connect with the Creator. You're not alone. And I think faith gives us that hope, that shimmer of light, that once we do have that moment, that connection with the one, it fills up. It's more than enough. And then it's not just God, it's the sentient beings, it's the angels and all, the whole host. So faith really allows us as human beings, when we experience extreme loneliness, to really connect at the spiritual level with other dimensions and of creation of the Creator, such as the angels. Maybe
something to aim for, Mahsheed.
I was going to say, may the force be with you.
Yeah.
Really close.
Absolutely. Okay, our next question, do you need to suffer to increase your spirituality? I guess we're talking a lot about how this is an opportunity to grow. So do we need to suffer to increase our spirituality? Could you connect with God to be stronger than before if you live a stress-free life. So, yeah, what do you think? Do you need to suffer to be spiritual and to grow?
Well, I think anybody who's paying attention to their life and who allows themselves to connect with others will suffer, because there will be the inevitable events of life that cause suffering, the loss of parents, the loss of friends, the failures, the times we've let somebody down very, very badly. We will suffer, or even physical suffering, an illness or an operation that we need. So if you're paying attention, you will experience distress and suffering. And it's only the foolish person who pretends otherwise. So it's how we respond. Now, people say it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens to you that makes you who you are. And I can look back on times in my life when I've made major decisions that have been distressing things to do, but they've been the making of me. Or a time when I've been in confusion and had to choose a path. And when I look back, it's been the making of me. So I think it's inevitable if we're paying attention, and if we have the right kind of support and we bring our faith to bear upon it, we will inevitably go through it. The things that we experience as most intensely personal are also the things that are most universal. So the person who puts their arm, who sort of throws their arms around themselves and says, woe is me, is never the person who can reach out to others. And it's the reaching out to others in your suffering, as Mahsheed was saying, that makes a difference.
I like your point. It's inevitable. Having a pain-free life is inevitable. Because, I think that's something that we just cannot avoid, basically. No. As you said, loved ones will die. You'll experience health problems. There's going to be some challenges in your life. No matter how much we may feel we're wrapped up in cotton wool, it's still going to happen in one way or another, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mahsheed, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with both of you. As Colleen sort of said, with wisdom and experience, I can't beat that. Of course, there's a Quranic verse in chapter 2 that says is exactly what Colleen has just told us. We will certainly test you with something of fear and hunger, loss of wealth and fruits, but give glad tidings and to the persevering and the patient. So we sort of almost, the life that we live is almost designed to have a little bit of suffering. They say no pain, no gain. I mean, it's difficult. It's not that God wants bad for us or that he wishes evil for us. It's just part and parcel of growing up, as Colleen was saying. And I think it makes us, it actually shapes who we are if we learn to. Another scholar that I actually researched, and you did as well, Zuleyha, Said Nursi, his outlook on patience is very interesting. He actually says we have enough patience. With every calamity, we're actually given the capacity to deal with it as well gets sent down by God. So we're not just left on our own. But he says often what happens is that although we give an adequate ability to address the misfortune, we squander it on baseless fears, because he says we focus on misfortunes of the past while the distress is gone, the tranquility remains. So that's no longer a misfortune. So we shouldn't be focused on things that happened in our past. And he says for the days to come, they haven't come yet. So we shouldn't squander our energies, the patience that we have for today. Future possibilities. Will I get a divorce? Will I be hit by a car? Will I have cancer? How am I going to die? Those sorts of things. So we have enough patience, each of us, despite the toughest situation in our human capacity every day, to take it one day at a time. But we often squander that energy by focusing on the past and the future. So the answer is to be present in the moment. And yes, there will be suffering, but there's also joy. There's also thankfulness, because we climb to God through either shukr, thanks, or through patience, sabr. And both are beautiful stairways to the Creator. I guess it's sometimes the package that's in our lap. And there we we need to resolve to have trust in the Creator's plan for us as well.
I guess it comes to my point, what is suffering, or what is a calamity anyway? It's not that easy to define sometimes, because what we might think is a calamity may actually not be, because of the outcomes that it produces. We may not like it. It's like sitting through an exam. We may not like it, but is it a calamity, or is it our way to grow and develop ourselves? Do you think sometimes we need to change the way we view the challenges in life? Will that benefit us?
Well, certainly the person who keeps asking, why me? Why has this happened to me? Why has this happened to my family? Will not grow through the experience. So I think, again, it does come back to what resources we bring to the experience. And I think there's a lot of, I just love what Mahsheed was saying about living in the present moment. I often used to say to people that some of the older people in my parish would be feeling anxious about the future. And I'd say to them, we don't actually even have this afternoon. We don't have tomorrow yet. We have now, and now is the time to be grateful and to live in the present moment. And there's a famous Christian mystic, Brother Lawrence, who talked about living in the present moment, just being present with God in each moment, and not, that's such wisdom, not to look back, not to be too anxious about the future, but just to live in the moment.
Yeah. We could exhaust a lot of energy thinking about possibilities that may actually never happen in the future.
Yes. And of course, a time like this will produce anxiety in people. Of course, we wonder, we're going to be locked down for 6 weeks or 12 weeks more in Melbourne. What's going to happen? How many people are going to die? Will I get it? All those questions. But we waste our energy if we become overly anxious.
That's right. It's not like we can completely dismiss it, but if we absorb ourselves in it to the level of exhaustion, that's when it becomes a challenge. All right, we've got time for one more question. So it's a mental health question. Mental health seems to affect the men more so than women. With an all-female panel, what would you recommend to the men to remain hopeful and optimistic during this pandemic and beyond, when things do get tough? What's your recommendation to the men?
Mahsheed, do you want to go first?
Stick with the women.
Okay, let me say, Mahsheed, I mean, with women, maybe is it because we're more expressive and we're able to talk about things, and men bottle it up?
Yeah.
Is that something that they could focus on? And also, sorry to cut you, but they may also feel more financial responsibility, and with job cuts, there are so many factors involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it must be a really tough time, and I'm not a psychologist. I can't speak on that profession, and it would have been good to have a male perspective, maybe in the future panels. But yeah, like you said, maybe some men take it a bit more with job cuts and things like that. But again, this is where faith helps as well, men and women, to just really have a bit of more reliance on the Creator. As Ibn Jawziyah, he's one of the famous scholars in the Islamic tradition, he has an interesting saying. He says, if life was not about hardship, then the prophets and the saints and the pious people would have lived the most comfortable life of lives. So, we have in our scriptures, in both the Bible and the Quran, so many countless examples of prophetic, beings, great people who have gone through hardships. So they have been through that. Job lost all his wealth. All his family left him. He had this physical illness. Yet what we see is that he made that beautiful prayer. And I love his prayer. I'm having a blank at the moment. But essentially, he wanted to pray to God that his ability to supplicate to him is not hindered. So he was quite patient. I think I don't have the answers. I think practically we should try and reach out to our men and women and our family members, our neighbors. I think one of the slaps on our faces in this pandemic has been that we've all been before COVID, so isolated, not knowing our neighbors, not knowing our communities. that we really, God is kind of saying, wake up with this pandemic, wake up and don't be greedy. You know, there's toilet paper wars we saw across the country, these sorts of things. You know, what's humanity? What has our humanity come to? And I think tonight's been all about this discussion with Colleen and Zuleyha has been that there is something else that faith can provide for us, and we need to reflect. Yes, these things are stressful, and there is a reality to our psychology, but this stress will hopefully allow us to grow and shine. You know, diamonds are made deep within the earth, you know, and a lot of pressure is placed on them. So we need to shine by having some hard pressure. And maybe this is the refinement, the reform that we all need as a collective human consciousness, men and women, and spiritually as well. I hope, inshallah.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Colleen, what do you think? What have you got to say for the men?
Well, I think men are learning, and I think young men especially are showing the way that men can be vulnerable, they can share their feelings, that it's nothing sooky, as we would have once said, about doing that. And so I would just encourage men to be honest, to be reflective, pay attention, and to be open and honest, and to reach out. I do think women have an advantage in that we just seem to be enculturated more to do it. But I think a lot of younger men are better at it than their fathers were, and that gives me hope. And I see my sons, younger men, and their openness is a lovely thing to see. And I think that I think younger men of faith are being more open too about their experiences and their feelings. And it's about sharing our humanity. There was a famous theologian who said that our humanity that's not co-humanity, if we don't get alongside another person just in their humanity and ours, then we're being inhuman. And it's so true. It allows us to be alongside one another as women and men equally made in the image of God.
Very true. So we're really one in humanity, so we need to share the load and care for each other. Thank you, both of you, Colleen and Mahsheed, for your insights. It's been there's been a lot of positivity and a lot to take on in a good way, especially during these hard times. It's much appreciated. Your words of wisdoms have come to us like pearls, so really appreciate that. So thank you. And I want to now call on Reverend Dr. Robert Dernbacher, Dean of the Theological School at the Trinity College, to wrap up the session for us. And we've been talking about men, but you may want to say a few things on behalf of the male gender as well while you're here, Bob. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Zuleyha. It's good. It's great to be with all of you tonight. And I've been just reflecting on things that have been said over the past 45 minutes or 50 minutes or so. And it's just amazing the common experiences that we're sharing together, and how this pandemic has brought us together in a unique format and in a unique way to share these common experiences and common thoughts that we share between our faiths. One of the features of the pandemic lockdown, I hate to admit this, but one of the features for me has been, I've been able to watch a bit more television, as I think probably a number of you have. And one of the phrases I keep hearing is how, and it relates to how advertising now is kind of built on the back of COVID-19, it seems. And it's this phrase, we're all in this together. And I can't remember if it's a bank or which outfit has this jingle that I hear on television. And I've been kind of passing this phrase, we're all in this together, off as pretty trite and meaningless. But I think tonight our dialogue has given that phrase, we're all in this together, a lot of meaning in a very significant way. And so I'm thankful for that. We have talked about our common experiences, about how our faiths have intersected with calamity, how we've commonly started to count our blessings a bit more than we have in the past, how we've turned to God in prayer, and how we're spending more time with family. And we've also talked tonight too about the common human experience of suffering, suffering that we experience ourselves, but also the suffering experienced by the heroes of our faith. And I just think it's been an amazing evening to share these common experiences and common traditions in a way that we probably wouldn't be able to do if it weren't for COVID-19. And so we're here tonight on Zoom, on YouTube, because of COVID. So maybe we need to be thankful for that opportunity as well. So I'd like to thank all of our presenters, to Mahsheed and Colleen for your very thoughtful words tonight and your willingness to answer difficult questions along the way. Thank you, Zuleyha, for your expert chairing of our session this evening as well. I'd also like to thank, on behalf of the students and staff at Trinity College Theological School, the Australian Intercultural Society, and ISRA, for co-sponsoring with us this fantastic evening. Thank you, Ahmet of AIS as well for putting this together. Ahmet and I have done a few things together, and we had grand plans for 2020 where we'd actually have a couple of meals together, bring our students and young people together to share in an iftar during Ramadan, and then share in a luncheon during the Christian season of Advent. And of course, COVID-19 had other plans for us. So hopefully next year we'll be able to realize some of these opportunities for interfaith dialogue. For us at Trinity, this is a really important part of what we do as theological educators. We're currently undergoing a review of our curriculum at Trinity, and we're looking at what characteristics, what attributes do we want all our graduates to have coming out of Trinity. And one of them is the ability to engage in meaningful interfaith conversation. And so these sorts of events like this event tonight will help us as we do our work at Trinity as theological educators very much. So thank you for that. Ahmet promised me I could have 30 seconds just to talk about what's coming up at Trinity. So I'm going to take advantage of those 30 seconds. We have a couple of Saturday events coming up. 3rd of October, a Saturday, we're going to be exploring pioneering ministry and church planting at Trinity on Zoom. And then on the 28th of November, we'll be exploring the scripture readings that are coming up in 2021 in the Revised Common Lectionary. So if anybody is interested in either of those two events or interested in taking classes at Trinity College Theological School, please email us at tcts@trinity.edu.au. That's tcts@trinity.edu.au. So again, thank you to all our presenters. Thank you to the sponsors of this evening. It's been very meaningful, a very worthwhile hour spent, I think. Thank you all for coming tonight. God bless you all. Have a good evening.